Crossovers in video games are an age-old idea, and depending on your stance, Nintendo is the collaboration king thanks to Smash Bros. And my hunch is telling me that y'all have contemplated more direct alliances featuring Nintendo's IPs from time to time. And a notion I personally like to frequent concerns what kind of Pokemon characters from various universes would choose were they to have access to these pocket monsters. And for today's topic, I shall apply said query to Fire Emblem's roster of villains. After all, throughout the world of Pokemon, rivals, evil teams and gym leaders act as the player's biggest obstacles, similar to how these nefarious warmongers seek to destroy Bluehead protagonist Number Who Gives a Shit. Before we dive headfirst into this topic, one must establish a clear-cut criteria for picking which monsters best suit their respective villain. To begin with, each foe will have a full team of 6 Pokemon, and everyone will be assigned one signature mon which only they can have. Any Pokemon I don't classify as a signature one is eligible to be featured on an infinite number of teams, which, trust me, is gonna be a regular occurrence. And it should be noted that I'm only picking Pokemon from generations 1 to 8, since if history is anything to go off, Gen 9's dex has yet to be complete. Regarding how I shall decide whom to allocate specific Pokemon to, much of that will be influenced by their personality and role as an antagonist. While you can rest assured class, weapons and other factors are applicable, anyone who's played Pokemon can relate to how we as individuals pick our teams based on the creatures that resonate with us, so it stands to reason that these scoundrels would do the same to a certain extent. Oh, and things like movesets, natures and all that jazz mean jack and shit. Now, I shan't assess every foe that Fire Emblem features, otherwise we'd accumulate more playtime than Three Houses. So to streamline the selection process, I shall be choosing 5 villains from every Fire Emblem world, not game. To further contextualize my stance, in the case of Elibe, I can only pick 5 villains that cover both Binding Blade and Blazing Sword, not 5 from each respective title. And though I'll primarily focus on the major antagonists, you may occasionally see a minor foe for a bit of variety. But before we begin, more than 50% of you watching aren't subscribed, so I'd very much appreciate it if you click that like and subscribe button and followed me on Twitch too, where I stream daily. Also, spoiler warning in general, and for those wondering, yes, I will be including heroes. No, I will not acknowledge Warriors or Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and I also will not be covering Engage as I have yet to complete that game, plus the DLC ain't quite done yet. With the formalities addressed, let us begin at, well, the beginning, with the original Fire Emblem and its sequel Mystery of the Emblem, remakes included. The land of Archanea is where the majority of character tropes were established, and this also applies to the enemy forces, so who better to roll out the red carpet than Garneth, pioneering the evil sorcerer dark cult cliché, even if that trope was dated by the 19th century. Naturally, since he's a dark magician and returns to spirit in Mystery of the Emblem, he's likely to favour ghost types. Thus, I believe this Pontifex's team would consist of Cofagrigus, Dusknoir, Gengar, Spiritomb, Dragapult, and his signature Pokemon, Giratina. Here we have a ghost-only team, most of which are considerably powerful, and Giratina is a literal shadow dragon. Transitioning from FE1 to FE3, our next foe and subsequent victim of Garneth's manipulation is Hardin. What an unfortunate fate befell the coyote, as in a moment of bitterness, Garneth exploited the darkness in his heart, turning him into the tyrannical emperor, and as is evidenced by his appearance, the man prioritizes intimidation and power, so it stands to reason that his team selection would be Pangoro, Barbaracle, Golisopod, Duraludon, Rhyperior, and Terrakion as his ace. Many of these beasts look scary and are rather bulky, matching Hardin's motif, with Terrakion being a pseudo-legendary and on similar footing to the Emperor's rank. And before you cry foul for failing to assign Hardin with Pokemon that are associated with possession and corruption, give it a few minutes. Moving up the morality spectrum, we find ourselves in the presence of Kamu, architect for one of the best archetypes in the franchise, being a man of great valor and strength that is unfortunately sworn to the wrong side of the conflict. So my gut's telling me that he would favor powerful Pokemon that have a sense of pride and honor to them. Therefore he shall receive Gallade, Sirfetch'd, Excavalier, Zangoose, Staraptor, and Cobalion as his signature beast, being one of the Unova's Swords of Justice, which fits like a glove. Now for an interesting turn of events, as the elusive Archanea was exclusive to New Mystery, projecting the aura of a loving mother and holy woman of God, but in reality is a cold and merciless fiend who discards people as if they were less than nothing, and so her choice of Pokemon would likely be Vileplume, Hypno, Kangaskhan, Girafarig, Miltank, and her ace Mawile. Behavior association is the theme surrounding Aramea's team, as Kangaskhan and Miltank are naturally maternal, Hypno and Vileplume showcase her manipulative and poisonous influence, while the literal palindrome Pokemon and Mawile double down on her two-faced trickery. And if you're curious, yes, every villain can Mega Evolve their Mons, because who wouldn't? Finally, we'll wrap up the first generation of Fire Emblem with its final boss Medeus, and though the game is called Shadow Dragon, this big bad is classed as an Earth Dragon in FE1, which is admittedly false advertising, but with this series you get used to it. The game is called ThreeHouses, but motherfucker, I count 4! Medeus I could easily perceive as a ground type enthusiast, and is all about overwhelming force. So for his team, I shall grant him Hippowdon, Flygon, Landorus, Garchomp, Torterra, and Zygarde as his ace. Naturally, assigning him a number of dragon ground types just makes sense, doubly so in the case of Zygarde, a legendary that can also change form in a similar vein to the Monarchies, therefore, it just works. With Archanea done and dusted, let's take a trip across the pond to the land of Valentia, acting representative for Fire Emblem Gaiden. Now, since FE2 is a smaller game, the roster of villains is rather trivial, and speaking frankly, I find that the majority don't have considerable feats to their repertoire. But nevertheless, we shall head straight to the top with Arm's nemesis and Father Rudolph. There's not much I can say about this man, barring his stoic and steadfast attitude, though his appearance and battle prowess are that of a titan, and the dude's got the occasional words of wisdom, and it would be wise to assume hefty Pokemon shall complement his station, in this case Golurk, Poliwrath, Golem, Snorlax, Slaking, and Registeel as his ace, all of which are considerably stacked, and in the case of the two normal types, they might as well be stationary boulders, much like the man himself when facing off against his son. Shifting gears to Celica's route, Jeddah is the one responsible for much of the strife and coarse corruption spreading throughout the land, primarily posing as a manipulator who uses Celica's faith in Miller and trusting nature to enforce his will, as well as exploiting her selective stupidity. Jeddah's team I hypothesize to mix poison and psychic types, as this fiend corrupts both the body and mind. Thus, the appropriate delegates would be Arbok, Slowking, Ariados, Claydol, Dragalge, and Nihilego as his trump card, given that it managed to take control of Lusamane, and the rest is history. Towering above both foes is the final boss of Act 5, Duma, another dragon endgame enemy, get used to that, who is driven by power and believes that strength is everything. So in accordance with his morals, I contemplate that Duma's choice of Pokemon would be Aerodactyl, Tyrantrum, Komomo, Regigigas, Steelix, and Rayquaza as his clutch choice. Not only are many of these Pokemon formidable, but Duma is an ancient dragon and almost fossil-like, hence the first two choices. Plus, this dragon looks somewhat similar to the King of the Skies, though if it ever Mega Evolved, Echoes would have a new final boss on its hands. For the final two Valentian foes, they happen to be exclusive to Echoes, and take the form of Brakut and Fernand. Both these men are considerably pompous, prideful, arrogant, and belittling, while still embodying noble etiquette and charm. Neither are overwhelming in their power, but they're far from pushovers. Thus, the prideful prince would likely select a team of Pokemon with status to their name, like Nidoking, Persian, Sceptile, Serperior, Empoleon, and Entei, all of which manifest an aura of pride, grandeur, and authority to them. Fernand I predict to follow a similar theme, but with a significantly spiteful edge given what occurs between himself and Clive. Therefore Dodrio, Kingdra, Noctowl, Weavile, Mightyena, and his ace Virizion would realistically complete his party, constituting a mix of regal Pokemon, but also dangerous and cunning ones to boot. Now to double up on the bits and enter the Super Nintendo era, consisting of Genealogy of the Holy War and Thracia 776. These are some of the most ambitious and darkest games in the franchise, with villains that pull off some truly magnanimous feats while remaining significantly complex. More so regarding genealogy. Case in point, we have Arvis, who is notable for accomplishing his goals and massacres your whole squad in cold blood despite being burnt alive.
Ironic.
It's a safe assumption that his team would likely lean towards deploying fire-related Pokemon, specifically Groudon, Chandelure, Magmortar, Heatran, Delphox, and Volcarona as its ultimate play, and if they could all learn Eruption, his squad of mages would be out of a job. While incapable of ruling the continent, the King of Thracia Travant has a huge impact on Leaf's life, murdering both parents and kidnapping his sister, only to not be featured in the boy's own game, make of that what you will. Since Thracia is overrun with wyverns, you can guess what type of specialist Travant would be, and so for his team, I gave him Drodagon, Dragalge, Charizard, Aerodactyl, Mandibuzz, and his ace, Salamence. I felt a mix of flying and dragon-type Pokemon was ideal, primarily those of considerable power and intimidation. Plus Mandibuzz is a vulture, which aptly describes this fiend as he looted a dead woman's corpse and stole her baby. I wonder if Disney took note of this. Jumping ahead to the second generation of FE4, we have the thunder goddess Ishtar, who despite being associated with some truly vile barbarians, her grace is considerably kind for an enemy general, and is tragically stuck between doing the right thing and serving Lord Batshit Crazy. Her position as a mage and affinity for thunder magic makes it reasonable to theorize that Ishtar would raise a team consisting of a Lowland Raichu, Ampharos, Espeon, Gardevoir, Starmie, and her ace, Thundurus. True, not all these Pokemon are electric types, but psychic Pokemon cover her magic disposition, and all are capable of learning electric moves. Not to mention having a mix of fierce and beautiful Pokemon is perfectly reflective of the type of woman Ishtar is. Man, these two deserved better. On the topic of mis-echoing thunder, let us transition to Thracia 776, for Reinhardt has become quite the fan favourite thanks to Heroes, acting as retainer to her ladyship, and is similarly versed in thunder magic, and quite the valiant commander, despite admitting that much of it is an act to hide his insecurities. And were he to hide behind his Pokemon, Manectric, Magnezone, Braviary, Wishiwashi, Zebstrika, and his masterpiece Raikou would reluctantly form the offensive line. Having electric type speaks for itself, and the other choices are Pokemon that I feel encompass a respective mix of bravery and putting forth a charade, though it is ironic that he doesn't have a single psychic type despite believing that magic is everything. Yeah, tell that to this lot. Finally, we have Kempf from Thracia, who simply put, is an asshole. Kempf is what you'd expect from an overbearing noble, being loud, obnoxious, spiteful, jealous, and a traitor, who despite his social standing, doesn't really have the skills to back up his blabbering, and so his Pokemon are liable to reflect such bravado, in the form of Granbull, Sharpedo, Rampardos, Toxicroak, Crocodile, and Exploud as his one and only. Many of these Pokemon are fairly strong and have a dark, twisted edge to them, and who else but Exploud to better fit a man that can kill his enemies with his incessant jabbering. God knows it's more effective than his actual battle prowess. Yet another generation of Fire Emblem is upon us, as we make haste to the Game Boy Advance with the Elibe era, featuring Binding Blade and Blazing Sword. When combined, both games have a large assortment of villains, so narrowing them down wasn't easy. But we shall start with the man whose life began with such promise before being cut deep via his father's resentment, Zephyr. As the King of Burn, Zephyr seeks to rid the world of humanity and put dragons back on top, exuding a very cold and bitter attitude, much to his sister's dismay. And well, it doesn't take an Oxford-level IQ to speculate that those of a sturdy disposition and dragon types would be the king's forte, specifically Hydreigon, Drodagon, Blastoise, Metagross, Ferrothorn, and Zekrom as his ultimate monster. The choice of dragons speaks for itself, but the remainders stem from their bulk and being covered in what is essentially a giant shell, very much like how the king has become a mere husk after losing his soul to madness and betrayal. It really is just like poetry. Despite being the king, Zephyr is not the final member of Burn Roy must defeat, as General Brunia carries out her liege's wishes and is known for her ice affinity, reminiscent of the first Elite Four member with similarly impressive Jigglypuffs. And so it stands to reason that she would confront the young lion with a team of Frostlass, Regice, Weavile, Aurorus, Alolan Ninetales, and Articuno for her final gambit. Naturally, these are all ice types, but I wanted to place emphasis on how many of them are rather mysterious, resolute, and beautiful, much like the women general, and her steadfast loyalty to her king, willing to do whatever it takes to carry out his will, even if her feelings will never be reciprocated. In the event that Byrne's army fails, Roy's final challenge comes in the form of Idun, a divine dragon whose backstory is so tragic it's a crime to let her die in the state she's in. But at least now, she has 6 friends by her side, consisting of Absol, Gudra, Sigilif, Milotic, Altaria, and Kiram as her greatest creation. These Pokemon embody a combination of various traits, ranging from elegant beauty, dark emptiness, and cosmic horror, all of which relate to pieces of the broken woman that is Idun. Hence, Kiram, being an incomplete Pokemon, is introspective of Idun's incomplete soul, the poor dear. At the very least, Heroes has been kind to her, and she didn't even have to get her tits out to make bank. Moving both forward and backwards in time, we shall address FE7's antagonist Nagal, yet another sorcerer who, instead of controlling people's minds, creates artificial humans known as morphs to carry out his bidding, and thus the Pokemon I suggest to suit him best were manufactured or changed as a result of human intervention, ultimately boiling down to Porygon Z, Genesect, Rotom, Magearna, Type Null, and finally Mewtwo. This definitely gives Nagal more of a niche compared to the other villains, and many of these mons are high in special attack, which pairs nicely with his magic affinity. Plus the fact that Mewtwo can Mega Evolve into 2 different forms is just icing on the cake, though probably not the best move if Nagal wishes to remain in charge.
We dreamed of creating the world's strongest Pokemon, and we succeeded.
Our last Elibean adversary is one of Nagal's morphs and the self-proclaimed perfect being Sonia, who despite being extremely alluring, is a disgusting and abhorrent woman, believing all to be beneath her and treats the little bundle of joy Nino like dirt.
Bitch!
Therefore, someone so vile would judiciously become a poison-type specialist, utilizing Nidoqueen, Seviper, Drapion, Tentacruel, Roserade, and Salazzle as her ace. Admittedly, there are stronger, more fearsome Pokemon to choose from, but this team constitutes a nice mix of simultaneously horrifying and beautiful creatures, which I find ideal given Sonia's inward and outward appearance. Plus, Salazzle is the perfect Pokemon for this perfect being, having the capability to poison anything and everything, which is precisely what Sonia does no matter who encounters this deadly rose. And now we come to the end of the 32-bit saga with Sacred Stones, one of the few entries to have no ties to other existing universes, causing FE8 to have a comparatively small cast. Yet despite this shallow pool, many of the villains make for some remarkable adversaries. Naturally, poor Prince Leon is up first, who was under the corruptive influence of the Demon King Formortis. Therefore, the theme of possession and spirits shall be the basis for his team, instituting Golurk, Bayonet, Mismagius, Spiritomb, Mimikyu, and finally his ace Darkrai. I find it rather amusing that all his Pokemon barring his signature choice are ghost types, which is a nice reflection of the spirit that's killing him from within, and appointing Darkrai as his one and only is very appropriate given this Pokemon's supposed murder of an innocent girl, yet apparently Nintendo don't do dark stuff. Right, Mr. Miyamoto? Leon succumbing to the Demon King ultimately led to Grado's downfall, yet the most loyal of Grado's general, Selena, was willing to lay down her life for her country. Much like her liege, this Floorsplar is considerably tragic, holding on to the hope that the Emperor will see the error of his ways, despite the man's ghost having long left his shell. And so despite her kind nature, she never backs down from trying to stop Prince Ephraim. As a gifted mage but fierce general, I reckon her Pokemon would be a combination of dignified yet perilous, bearing forth Jolteon, Lapras, Ninetales, Mesprit, Dragonair, and finally Cresselia as her ace, which I think is a nice compliment to Leon's Darkrai. I guess this makes Magpul the Sinnoh of Fire Emblem, only with 100% less hate gems, thank fucking god! Well, that's enough sympathetic villains for now. How about we welcome two of the foulest dastards in the continent, Volta and Kaliak. When concerning the former, Volta has a sadism stat higher than Blissey's HP, and is all about torturing his prey and enjoying the thrill of the hunt. Despite being a Wyvern Rider, poison is the element I would primarily associate with this madman, along with intimidation, and thus Volta shall bear Drapion, Tentacruel, Vikavolt, Seviper, Hydreigon, and his ace Yanmega, due to it being a terrifying bug type, and its tinted lens ability matches nicely with Volta's own pierce skill. And yes, Venomoth can do this as well, but really? Kaliak, also known as the Tiger's Eye, couldn't care less about others or the results of his actions. This is a man who would happily kill an innocent woman and only seeks to gain strength and move up in the world. While he's certainly got the credentials to run for president, his choice of Pokemon I venture to be considerably fierce in their appearance and strength. Therefore Kingler, Tauros, Zangoose, Golisopod, and Donphan will make up his squad, with his ace Incineroar rounding out the team, since it's a tiger-like Pokemon, has the Intimidate ability, and is pretty strong to boot, especially in the context of Smash Bros. Finally, we shall acknowledge the traitor of Rhinus, and arguably most tragic of souls, Orson. This once pristine knight lost his way after the death of his wife, and was more than willing to betray his homeland for the chance to be reunited with the courts of his beloved. Morbid, I know. A Pokemon team that would benefit this madman is one I feel to focus on protection and remaining stationary, since even after Grado takes over, the man locks himself away just to be with his darling. Thus his team would prioritize locking down the battlefield, made possible with Fortress, Shedinja, Caracosta, Cradilly, Trevenant, and his ace Yamask. For though it is a weak Pokemon, it would serve to ease Orson's suffering by having the face of his wife on it. Man, Nintendo is fucked up! Transitioning into the third dimension allows us to usher in the Tellius series, one of the largest and most beloved games in the franchise, playing host to a huge variety of villains, so narrowing it down to 5 wasn't easy. If we start with Path of Radiance, then of course Ashnod must be acknowledged, considering the ambition and power-hungry mindset of the Mad King, believing that strength is all that matters, and takes the phrase survival of the fittest a little too literally. Pokemon befitting of this maniac must have sufficient power, thus I imagine Tyranitar, Aggron, Machamp, Kabutops, Gyarados, and his personal choice Haxorus would fit the bill, for they all have at minimum 110 base attack, and in the case of Haxorus, it's an extremely powerful dragon that gets even stronger thanks to its ability Rivalry, the same way Ashnod got a boost after going berserk. Next, we have one of the 4 riders of Dayan, Petrine, an extremely loud and boisterous woman who wouldn't think twice about roasting her enemies and allies both figuratively and literally. Fire comprises much of her fighting style, so her team shall be Typhlosion, Rapidash, Darmanitan, Arcanine, Talonflame, and finally her ace, Blaziken. All these fire types, while not of legendary standing, are still strong and look rather fierce, yet bold in their design, much like the general herself. Plus, having Blaziken as her ace among the other choices is made possible through its Mega Evolution. And on that note, I am still waiting for my Mega Typhlosion, Game Freak, and don't think I lack the dexterity to see this through, because I'm a Metroid fan. I know all about waiting. Making way for our next rider of Dayan, General Zelgius, also known as the Black Knight, is a man I've gone on record proclaiming to be my all-time favourite Fire Emblem villain. However, while the man is composed and relatively honourable, unlike Camus, Zelgius isn't above humiliating his foes and doing the occasional scumbag move. Thus, I predict Knight-themed Pokemon, but not necessarily chivalrous ones, would suit his preferences, consisting of Bisharp, Excadrill, Chestnut, Aegislash, Excavalier, and his trusted companion Zacian, the legendary dog with a giant fuck-off sword, which when pitted together reminds me of Artorias and Sif from Dark Souls, so make of that what you will. Zelgius may be the most revered warrior in Benion, but even he is not above the respective Prime Minister Sephiron, and oh man has this dude seen some shit. Sephiroth has lived for centuries and witnessed a great many atrocities firsthand, being one of the last herons alive after the citizens of Benion committed mass genocide, taking on the role of puppet master. I feel his team of Pokemon would be an extension of his life experiences. Case in point, Zato and Archeops resemble his heron heritage and magical prowess. Honchkrow standing in for the role of Mastermind, the Lati twins advocating Laurent's journey across the entire continent, and finally his ace Dialga being the legendary that controls time, symbolic of Sephiroth's time spent on this earth. I'm telling you people, it really is like poetry. And finally, what better way to wrap up one of the biggest adventures in Fire Emblem with the literal god amongst men, Ashera. Being responsible for bringing the world of Tellius into existence, Ashera acts as the final obstacle our heroes must face. Therefore, it stands to reason that her team would be all about legendaries, specifically ones that either control or epitomize an aspect of life while simultaneously counterbalancing each respective monster, as Order is essentially her MO, summoning to her side Solgaleo and Lunala to signify day and night, Ho and Kyogre for sky and fire against sea and water. Yes, I know Groundon is Kyogre's counterpart, but Ho just fits better. Xerneas due to its ability to grant life, and finally Arceus being the god of Pokemon and also having the signature move Judgment. I'd make the poetry joke again, but I don't want the mouse coming after me after the Annette fiasco. Technically speaking, the DS remakes precede the Tellius games, however our revisit to Archanea shall be with the franchise's savior Awakening, the first 3DS entry where a vast majority of fans came into this universe. And while this gem has so much going for it, the villains aren't an aspect I find much value in. For the most part, Awakening's bosses I divulge to be either boring or underutilized, but even the lamest of fools deserves to procure some Pokemon. Thus Gangrel's eager to pick his partners, for he instigated the conflict with Chrom and is guilty of the crime of identity fraud, proclaiming himself to be the Mad King. Yeah, sure thing. Next you'll be telling me this dweeb is the Black Swordsman. This jester's Pokemon I summarize to be chaotic with an emphasis on speed and mischievous energy. Therefore, and thusly, Gangrel's team shall be Grimmsnarl, Heloisk, Infernape, Cacturne, Sableye, and his ace, Zapdos, since that 11th sword of his is not to be trifled with. Once Gangrel becomes a non-issue, the shepherd's next obstacle comes in the form of Walhart, a colossal giant of a man who believes in strength above all else, a proclamation that's sounding more and more redundant by the minute, but thankfully has the capacity to constitute his claims. Due to his stature and attire, I always expected Walhart to base his teams around steel types given their resilience and noticeably large, somewhat daunting designs. Hence the Conqueror's team shall be Aggron, Metagross, Bastiodon, Gigalith, Fortress, and his ace Celesteela. The irony in all this being that Walhart's team would offer more of a challenge than himself, especially if this was pre-Gen 6, because good lord fighting Metagross was a nightmare. Walhart may be a tyrant, but one man can only do so much, which is precisely where his generals come in. The first being Cervantes and his magnificent set of bristles, who would naturally require a team of Pokemon who are just as exceptional when it comes to their golden locks. And in this case, he's likely to choose Pidgeot, Kricketune, Cinccino, Mienshao, Jellicent, and finally his signature Pokemon, Stoutland. Because I say, good chap, those are the most exceptional set of whiskers this side of a 19th century gentleman's club. On the other side of the fence, we have a general who follows the Conqueror for the sake of his sister, Yanfei, a dangerous samurai who so tragically falls victim to the sorrows of love and betrayal, you'd swear this was written by Shakespeare. As a result of his warrior lineage and cold, practically secretive nature, Yanfei's team would realistically be comprised of Eastern-inspired Pokemon, as well as those of a dark and elusive disposition, more specifically Cloyster, Crobat, Skarmory, Shiftry, Luxray, and his ace, Samurott, because this parallel couldn't be more obvious if I tried. Finally, we come to the last of Awakening's foes, with in my opinion, the worst of the bunch, Valadar. Why? Because the dude adds nothing new to the Garnet archetype and does just about everything worse. He debuts as a joke and fails to improve going forward. Heck, knowing him, he wouldn't make it past the Nugget Bridge. I believe it is fair to summarize that his choice of Pokemon would be a mix of dark, poison, and ghost types, given his actions and ability to possess a select few, with the resulting choices being Malamar, Toxtricity, Trevenant, Spiritomb, Cacturn, and his ultimate life form Eternius. After all, it's a poison dragon type, and well nigh looks like Grima to boot. Makes me wonder if Lucina ever tried catching the damn thing. Let us make haste for Fire Emblem Fates, as this particular case study is fascinating in its execution, for the overlapping idea revolves around the perception of right or wrong being dependent on one's allegiance and morality. In reality, this game's so ethically skewed to the point where each villain is blatantly evil no matter your stance, and somehow far less layered than Awakening's offerings. That's a special kind of lazy. Bruh. Of course, the most bastardly douchebag in every scenario is King Garen, a boorish tyrant of a man who is literally dead on the inside and eventually ends up as either a draconic husk or a disgusting blob. Therefore, a poetic choice of Pokemon would encapsulate both outcomes, while also having significant physical prowess, with Nidoking, Muck, Feraligatr, Abomasnow, Tyranitar, and his ace Guzzlord doing a bang-up job in my opinion, especially the latter, which is a giant dragon blob, whatever the hell this is meant to be. Garen was known for having many wives throughout his reign, and fuck me did they produce some pristine offspring. One said concubine was the mother of Azora, Archanea. Hailing from the land of Valor, Her Highness is all about that songstress life and would appropriately deploy Pokemon associated with music and dancing. In fact, we can further narrow it down to types based on lyrical association, for she taught Azora Lost in Thoughts All Alone, a piece that is accompanied by both water and groans of increasing discomfort. When deciding what to present Her Majesty, I went with Roserade, Toxtricity, Oricoro, Primarina, Gothitelle, and her ace Meloetta. Admittedly, it's not the most threatening lineup, but I feel it fits Arate's demeanor. In fact, it's reasonable to envision Azora with a similar, if not identical team. But that's a video for another day. Archanea acted as Garen's second wife, while the king's second in command is the big air quotes here, tactician Iago. A slimy wretch of a man who has a massive hate boner for Corrin and goes out of his way to try and make the young royal look like a fool and a failure at all costs, something he's all too familiar with. Iago plots from the shadows and tries to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Thus, a team featuring an abundance of ghost and poison types feels like the most logical course of action, with the full lineup being Victory Bell, Chandelure, Skuntank, Miss Magius, Claydol, and his ace Gourgeist. After all, the man looks like he's dressed for Halloween, so who better to pair him with than a giant jack-o'-lantern? Enough about the Norians. Now it's time to discuss the leader of a supposed neutral nation, Kotaro. This master ninja will happily take up arms against Corrin no matter their decision, keen to have his nation of Makushu move up in the world and happy to stab anyone in the back to do so. Naturally, being a ninja, his team will be based primarily on a similar thematic. So not that different from Koga, having access to Ninjask, Venomoth, Crobat, Quillfish, a Selgor, and a Greninja as his pride and joy, since it's literally got ninja in the name. Plus, this water starter is exceptionally powerful, and anyone who's played Conquest would know that Kotaro and his respective chapter is one of the hardest in the game, and on Lunatic he might as well have access to the Ash version. At last, we shall pay the Hoshidans a visit, since though they are shown to be a peaceful nation and the clear victims in the whole ordeal, because God forbid moral ambiguity be present in a Fire Emblem game, one of the royal siblings took your choice to side with Nor very poorly, as throughout Conquest, Takumi's hatred perpetually manifests until he is nothing but a vessel that demands Corrin's corpse, lest he be unable to find peace. Since this fallen prince is fueled by loathing, I have a hunch he'll prioritize Dark-type Pokemon, with Ghost, Poison, and even Ice being acceptable substitutes, with an ensemble made up of Decidueye, Toxicroak, Glalie, Cacturn, Shiftry, and his ace, Naganadel. Though given his actions during Conquest, I highly doubt Takumi would make for a good trainer in the first place. He's certainly not gaining any friendship points, so good luck evolving that Golbat. Echoes is the next game to precede Fates, but in accordance with the DS remakes, that ship has sailed. And with the 3DS era discontinued, it's time to switch over to the Switch with Fire Emblem Houses. And picking out foes for this topic was tricky since it ultimately boils down to one's outlook. For this title, it's oozing with questionable characters on all sides, and there isn't a soul that's intrinsically good or bad. With that said, the main antagonist across 3 of the 4 routes is Lady Edelgard, leader of the Empire and dead set on freeing Fodlan from its dogmatic and discriminatory rule by any means necessary, for Her Highness is a highly ambitious and resilient woman, who would favour Pokemon that are just as daunting and dangerous as she, featuring the likes of Moltres, Houndoom, Garchomp, Corviknight, Silvally, and her ace Yveltal, all of which are fearsome and powerful beasts, with a legendary that resembles a red and black bird. A black eagle, if you will.
Duh.
Heading north from the Empire into Kingdom territory is the leader of the Blue Lions, Dimitri, a man who at first seems like the perfect prince and would make for a dashing king. Until he snaps something fierce and becomes little more than a wild boar, not fit to rule and kept afloat by his hatred for his stepsister, taking the Fates family drama to a whole new level. Dimitri is known for having inhuman strength and is regularly associated with lions and pigs, along with trying to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, using a similarly steadfast party comprised of Lucario, Pyroar, Electivire, Emboar, Braviary, and finally his ace, Necrozma Dusk, since when assuming the role of antagonist, he doesn't deserve the honour of being partnered with Solgaleo, making for a nice bit of thematic symbolism which this game has down pat. Heading east from the kingdom into Alliance territory, we have Claude, easily the most chill and level-headed of the bunch, who despite being a master tactician, has yet to grasp the concept of loyalty among his countrymen, given his cowardly nature and willingness to stab others in the back to achieve his goals, something Free Hopes took way too far, but that's neither here nor there. Since it's within the man's nature to think of every possible outcome, Claude's team would likely act as an extension of his prowess in regards to his weapon of choice, personal class, and keen intellect. Thus Alakazam, Inteleon, Decidueye, Noivern, Gliscor and his signature Pokemon Zoroark seem to be the ideal choices, doubly so when it comes to Claude's ace, since this thing is deceitful by nature and ironically the weakest of the selection, though I'm sure he could find a way to make it work in Ubers. At the heart and centre of Fodlan lies Garreg-Mach Monastery, ruled by the Archbishop Rhea, otherwise known as Seros, whose actions are an integral predecessor to the eventual conflict. For while the severity of the situation varies between each lord, they all strive to rid the world of Rhea's influence over Fodlan, which has been a mixed bag to say the least. Rhea is a very two-faced individual, emanating a soft, motherly and kind aura as the Archbishop, yet becomes cold, vengeful and callous as the warrior Seros at a moment's notice. Thus Pokemon which combine her convictions all the while leaning towards dragon types are superlative, such as Kangaskhan, Mew as a nod to Sophis, Lugia, Altaria, Goodra, and her ace Reshiram, as I can't help but observe that this legendary and her dragon form are practically one and the same. Long before Edelgard threw Fodlan into chaos, the biggest threat to this land was the thief Nemesis, mascot for the War of Heroes and took part in the butchering of Rhea's people, a course of action she did not take kindly to. After his initial failure, the King of Liberation was kept in stasis till Byleth had to finish the job for good, and due to his preserved state and heavy emphasis on bones in both his attire and weaponry, I feel that Nemesis would have an admiration for fossil Pokemon, specifically Kabutops, Aerodactyl, Armaldo, Tyrantrum, Rampardos, and his ace Xurkitree, which is not a fossil Pokemon, but just look at this thing. It gives off such an Agarthian vibe, and I wouldn't be surprised if Nemesis started swinging it around as if it were the spine of Sophis. Oh yes, the Sword of the Creator is exactly what you think it is. At last, we've reached Fire Emblem Heroes, which despite having access to almost the entire extended universe, hosts its own assortment of OCs that can be hit or miss depending on if intelligence systems remember if they exist. Because what the fuck is going on with Loki? Did Disney buy the rights to her too? For the remainder of this video, I'll be evaluating one villain from books 2 to 6, as 7 is currently incomplete and Veronica feels more like an anti-hero at this point. With that said, book 2 pertained a vast number of foes that vary on the ethics spectrum, but the one who embodied pure evil was Suta, desiring to see everything burn to the ground, don't you fucking dare, and would unsurprisingly ascertain a team of only fire-type Pokemon, bulky ones at that like Heatran, Macargo, Camerupt, Colossal, Darmanitan, and his ace Volcanion, since it has a similar physiology to this Goliath, plus when fire meets ice, it makes water, and this beast is a fire-water type. Turning the page from book 2 to 3, we have the living embodiment of death itself, Hell. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put together that she would persist in utilizing ghost-type Pokemon if the Bed of Skulls weren't a dead giveaway. It will simultaneously stand to reason that she would desire Pokemon who strike fear into their victims, as well as reflect Hell's status as Queen of Hell. That's not confusing in the slightest. This team would contain Dusknoir, Drifblim, Moltres, the Galarian version, Mismagius, Nidoqueen, and finally Necrozma Wings as her ace Pokemon, due to their matching aesthetics, plus she's basically a creature of the night before Book 6 made them canonical. So yeah, Heroes has both the Grim Reaper and vampires. Keep this up and it's only a matter of time till we get a Belmont banner. Going from Hot Topic to the complete acid trip that is Book 4, we have Freya, Queen of the Nightmare Realm and resident sympathetic villain, for the poor dear was outcast by her peers since childhood, which I'm sure they regretted once she slipped into her summer attire.
Giggity.
While her association with nightmares would make Darkrai an obvious choice, Freya's design and true form are heavily tied to nature, and she's a very hot and cold person, depending on whether she's among humans or her fellow fairies. Therefore, I feel her Pokemon picks would be Florges, Gardevoir, Venusaur, Ferrothorn, Maractus, and her ace Gogoat. Sure, it's not a legendary, but the resemblance speaks for itself. Transitioning from a field of flowers to a mechanized citadel, Book 5 also congregated many villains, all of which having ties to the false king Fafnir, a man who's equal parts evildoer as means to an end via Atri's influence, that ranged from mere conquest to giving him a fallen form that is yet to receive the accompanying banner. Fafnir and the majority of Book 5's cast ride these armor-like automatons, and since he transformed against his will, steel types and artificial Pokemon would fit nicely into his team-building mechanism. Therefore, Kinklang, Genesect, Silvally, Aegislash, and Porygon Z will suffice, and for his ace, he shall bear Base Necrozma, since that Pokemon combines with others and constitutes a similar shape and color scheme to Neovila. Heck, you could replace Fafnir's mech with Necrozma, call it a legendary ult, and we'd be none the wiser. And to bookend this video, we have Veronica's sister and villain of Book 6, Letisa. By far the most tactful and strategic of Heroes' foes, except when she isn't, Letisa is extremely cunning and all about playing mind games and swaying public opinion to further her goals and ambitions, spoken like a true politician. Therefore, my money is on the psychic type to be where her favoritism lies, and if this were Gen 1, she would be nigh unstoppable, featuring Alakazam, Jinx, Uxie, Reuniclus, Delphox, and her ace, Deoxys. After all, a legendary psychic type, capable of taking on specific forms depending on the trainer's requirements, fits her tact to a T, and it would be some shit if we got an alt-dub Letisa's speed. Then again, it wouldn't be the first time Heroes unintentionally stole my idea. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining me for this little side project of mine. And while we're here, let's see which Pokemon were the most common among each of the teams. For Dusknoir, Golisopod, Zangoose, Kangaskhan, Garchomp, Golurk, Claydol, Dragalge, Tyrantrum, Nidoking, Weavile, Chandelure, Heatran, Delphox, Druddigon, Gardevoir, Rampardos, Braviary, Toxicroak, Hydreigon, Metagross, Ferrothorn, Goodra, Altaria, Porygon Z, Genesect, Nidoqueen, Seviper, Drapion, Tentacruel, Roserade, Fortress, Trevenant, Tyranitar, Aggron, Kabutops, Darmanitan, Aegislash, Crobat, Shiftry, Toxtricity, Decidueye, Silvally, and Alakazam all appeared at least twice in this video, while Spiritomb, Aerodactyl, Mismagius, and Cacturn made appearances on 3 separate occasions. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed this little tangent about potential Pokemon teams for Fire Emblem villains. Big thank you to all my patrons who suggested I make this into a full-fledged video instead of just a Twitter thread. And if you'd like to have your input and keep up to date about upcoming projects, please be sure to support my Patreon page. And for those of you who wish to see a video like this done again, only this time focusing on the Lords, remaining villains, or heck, different franchises in general, please let me know in the comments down below. Once again, please don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. Don't forget to follow me on Twitch where I stream daily, along with Twitter and Discord as well. I know I already thanked you guys once, but seriously, thank you so much to all the patrons for helping out. I really appreciate it. I'm really glad that I was able to follow through with this idea. Once again, because you all know, sorry that thanks to the new job, my upload has been really slow, but I honestly, I love all the support, the feedback, everything. You guys just keep me going despite, you know, the hectic workload and all the stuff that comes with it, but you lot are just, I love you all so much. You're the absolute best. And I'd like to say a very special thank you to Wolffox, Twisted Scarecrow, SpeckyX3, Lucina21, K-Dog, Jeremy Redinger, VC Videos 100, Starship 9, Midnight Castle, Maggieful, FireEmblemThreeHouses, and finally, Zenny Dragon. Thank you all so much. I love you from the bottom of my heart. You're the absolute best. Mwah! Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time.